Hey everyone, and welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5340, Introduction to Public Policy and Management. So today, we're going to dig into Chapter 4 from our required text, Essential History for Public Administration.
So this chapter is all about one of the most transformative periods in American history, the New Deal. This is the moment when the role, the size, everything about the federal government fundamentally changed because of a massive crisis. We're going to look at how it happened, why it happened, and most importantly, what it all means for us as students of public administration.
So that really gets to the core question here, right? How in the world did the United States go from the Roaring '20s, this decade of private wealth and a tiny hands-off government, to a total catastrophe that forced a complete reinvention of the relationship between the citizen and the state? Let's dive in.
Okay, so first things first, we've got to set the stage. To really get a feel for just how radical the New Deal's changes were, we need to see what America was like in the decade right before it all went down, the 1920s.
You know, this quote from Harding really nails the mood of the country back then. After the absolute trauma of World War I, people were just exhausted. They were tired of big public crusades and sacrifice. So when Harding called for normalcy, it wasn't just some catchy slogan, it was exactly what a worn-out public wanted. People just wanted to focus on their own lives, not on some grand national purpose.
And you know, this whole idea of normalcy wasn't just talk. It directly shaped government policy. The federal government in the 1920s was tiny by today's standards. I mean, federal spending was just a tiny 3% of the entire economy, and most of that was just paying off war debt and veterans' benefits. Outside of national security, the government really didn't do much. All those progressive policies were tossed aside, and the focus shifted to private interest. Business was booming, and the government's job was to just stay out of the way.
But of course, that hands-off approach, well, it came with some pretty major consequences. All that booming, unregulated speculation of the 20s, it created a massive bubble. And in 1929, that bubble didn't just leak, it burst, catastrophically.
I mean, the speed of this collapse was just mind-boggling. It wasn't some slow decline. It was a total free fall. Just look at the timeline. In a matter of weeks, a third of the stock market's value just disappeared, vanished into thin air. That speculative orgy, as Herbert Hoover called it, was officially over, and the country was about to pay a terrible price.
And the price for all that? It was paid in jobs. By 1932, the unemployment rate hit this staggering number, 25%. I want you to really think about that for a second. 1 out of every 4 families in the entire country had no wage earner. This wasn't just a recession, it was a complete and total economic meltdown.
And honestly, the numbers, they don't even begin to capture the human suffering. People lost everything. Shantytowns, which they bitterly called Hoovervilles, popped up in cities everywhere. Families were literally scavenging for food in city dumps. The book mentions people in Kentucky eating weeds just to survive. The social fabric was just ripping apart at the seams, with millions homeless and farmers grabbing their pitchforks to protest. So it's into this absolute chaos that Franklin Delano Roosevelt gets elected. The crisis was so deep, so profound, that the old, hands-off way of doing things was just not an option anymore. What the country needed was action. Immediate, massive, and completely unprecedented action from the federal government.
And boy, did Roosevelt deliver. He didn't come into office with some perfectly planned out ideology, but he was absolutely ready to experiment and, most importantly, to act fast. Those first 100 days of his administration unleashed this absolute whirlwind of legislation unlike anything America had ever seen. The crisis was so bad that bills that would normally get debated for months were just rushed through Congress, sometimes in a matter of hours.
And a perfect example of just how fast they were moving is the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. The bill passed at the very end of March. By August, we're talking just over 4 months later, 300,000 unemployed young men were already working in 1,300 camps all across the country. It was just a stunning display of the federal government's new ability to mobilize, and mobilize quickly.
Now, not every program just sailed through, right? The Social Security Act of 1935, which is maybe the most lasting piece of the New Deal, faced really intense opposition. On one side, you had people like Secretary of Labor Francis Perkins, who argued that citizens had a basic social right to be protected from the risks of capitalism. But on the other side, conservatives were screaming that this violated American traditions of self-help and individualism. The debate got ugly, and as our text points out, it even included some pretty nasty racist arguments from opponents in the South. So the New Deal wasn't just about handing out relief checks or creating insurance programs. It was also about physically reshaping the nation. The government put millions of people to work on a scale that had never been seen before, building the very infrastructure of a modern America.
I mean, the sheer scale of what they did is almost hard to wrap your head around. Just look at the numbers from one agency alone, the Works Progress Administration, or WPA. Over 8 years, it employed 8.5 million people. They built or repaired 600,000 miles of roads, 75,000 bridges, thousands of new schools, and new parks. From LaGuardia Airport in New York to the Riverwalk in San Antonio, the physical legacy of the WPA is literally all around us today.
And it wasn't all just bricks and mortar either. The WPA's Federal One program was this really bold and often controversial project to support the arts. It put artists to work painting murals, writers creating state guidebooks, and actors staging plays. The Federal Theater Project especially really drew a lot of fire from conservatives who accused it of being nothing more than a vehicle for pro-New Deal propaganda.
So after all this flurry of activity, what was the end result? Well, it was nothing less than a complete and total transformation of the American government and its relationship with its people.
Okay, so for us as public administration students, this table in the textbook is actually a perfect summary. Yeah, the New Deal provided relief and jobs. Sure, it helped with conservation. But look at points 3, 4, and 5. It established that the federal government was responsible for people's welfare. It reasserted strong presidential leadership, and it made economic planning a legitimate function of government. These were truly radical changes from the 1920s.
When you boil it all down, this was the fundamental philosophical shift. The old 19th century ideal of rugged individualism, the idea that you were completely on your own, sink or swim, that gave way to a new belief in social security and collective action. The idea that, hey, maybe we're all in this together, and government has a real role to play in protecting us from disaster. That idea became mainstream. And you can hear this new philosophy straight from Roosevelt himself in this quote. He's saying that in a modern civilization, we shouldn't have to deal with the terrible chances of life. The chance of starving when you got old, the chance of losing your home in a depression. The whole goal was to build a society that had a baseline of security and stability for everybody. So what we see is that the New Deal basically created a whole new social contract between the American people and their government. A contract built on this idea of shared responsibility and a public safety net. And that leaves us with a really crucial question to think about for our class. How is that very same contract being debated, challenged, and redefined in all the political and economic fights we see today? It's a question that gets right to the heart of what public administration is all about. All right, great session, everyone. Lots to think about there.